On November 19, 1999, four officers from London's Metropolitan Police responded to a routine call in Holloway, North London. The call had been registered at 11:47 p.m. as a domestic disturbance at number 47 Fortismere Avenue, a row of Victorian terraced houses typical of the neighborhood. Nothing in the initial call suggested it was anything more than standard, a neighbor reporting screams coming from the property requesting police verification. The four officers, PC Michael Barrett, 32, PC Sarah Chen, 28, PC David Morrison, 35, and PC Emma Willis, 26, arrived at the scene at 11:58 p.m. Within 40 minutes, all four would be traumatized in ways they couldn't adequately articulate. Within a week, all would have resigned from the police force, and to this day, 25 years later, none of them speaks publicly about what they found inside that house. But internal records do exist, filed under the classification 99-Z, a code used by the Met Police for cases that don't fit into conventional categories and shouldn't be discussed outside of extremely restricted channels. The house itself didn't have a particularly remarkable history. Built in 1887, it was one of 12 identical houses in the row, all with 3 stories, basements, and small gardens in the back. Records showed that the property had changed hands several times over the century, nothing unusual for London real estate. In November 1999, it was listed as a rental property, registered under the name of a property management company, Fortis Property Management Ltd. The current tenant, according to records, was a 43-year-old man named Adrian Whitmore, who had rented the property for 18 months. Neighbors described Whitmore as quiet, keeps to himself, the kind of tenant who never caused trouble. But on the night of November 19th, something had changed. Multiple neighbors reported hearing screams, not arguing, not typical domestic violence, but what one witness described as the sound of someone in absolute agony, as if they were being tortured. PC Barrett led the approach. Body cameras, relatively new technology in 1999, were not yet in use at the Met Police, so there is no video recording of what occurred. But there are audio recordings from the officers' radios, meticulously transcribed in the following days. Barrett rang the doorbell at 11:58:42 p.m. No answer. He banged on the door forcefully, identifying himself loudly. "Metropolitan Police! Mr. Whitmore, we need to speak with you about a reported disturbance." Silence for approximately 15 seconds. Then, clearly audible in the audio recordings, a male voice from inside the house. "Don't come in. Please, for God's sake, don't come in here." The voice was trembling, terrified. PC Chen answered through the door. "Sir, we've received reports of someone in danger. We need to check on their well-being. Please open the door." More silence. Then, "No one is in danger. Only me. And you can't help me. No one can. Just leave. Forget you were ever here." The officers exchanged glances. The protocol for such a situation was clear. With reports of screams and the occupants' refusal to cooperate, they had reasonable grounds for forced entry under concern for well-being. Barrett made the decision. "Mr. Whitmore, we're entering for a well-being check. Please step away from the door." He gestured to Morrison, who was carrying the portable battering ram. 3 blows and the lock gave way. The door slowly opened, revealing a dark corridor. A smell hit them immediately. Not rotten, not dead, but something different. Chemical, almost. Medicinal, mixed with something that PC Willis would later describe as the air of a hospital abandoned decades ago. Barrett went in first, flashlight illuminating the way. "Metropolitan Police, Mr. Whitmore, where are you?" The layout was standard. Hallway leading directly from the front door, stairs to the right going up to upper floors, door to the left to the living room, back door to the kitchen, and access to the basement. Everything seemed normal. Modern furniture, innocuous decor, no sign of struggle or violence. But there was something fundamentally wrong with the space, though none of the officers could initially articulate what. PC Chen would later try to explain in his exit interview. It was as if the house was slightly out of sync with reality, like when you watch video and the audio is a few frames behind. You can't pinpoint exactly what's wrong, but you know something is. The whole house had that quality, as if it were trembling, vibrating, but not physically, not in a way that I can adequately explain. The 4 officers moved down the hallway, checking the living room. Empty. Kitchen, empty. No sign of Whitmore. "Mr. Whitmore," Barrett called again, louder this time. "We need to see you for your own well-being." A voice answered, this time from above, from the 2nd floor. "I warned you. I tried to warn you, but it's too late now. You went in, you crossed the threshold, and now—" A long pause, then softer, almost with pity. "Now you will see, and after seeing, you cannot unsee. No matter how much you want to, no matter how much you try to forget, what is seen cannot be unseen. I'm sorry. I truly am." And then from upstairs came sound, not a scream this time, but laughter, long, hysterical laughter, humorless, the sound of sanity completely shattered. The 4 officers, training and instinct battling a growing sense of alarm, began to climb the stairs. None of them knew that this would be the last action they would take as police officers, because what they would find on the 2nd floor was not a crime they could arrest. It was not a situation they could resolve. It was something that would completely shatter their understanding of what was possible. And once broken, that understanding could never be fully restored. The stairs creaked under their feet as they climbed, each step producing a sound that seemed to echo longer than it should, as if the house had impossible acoustics, hidden spaces between the walls amplifying every sound. Barrett led, followed by Chen, then Morrison, with Willis closing in behind. When they reached the 2nd floor landing, they found 3 doors, 2 closed and 1 ajar at the end of the hallway, dim light leaking through the crack. The laughter had stopped, replaced by the sound of something being dragged, heavy, metallic, scraping against the wooden floor. Barrett approached the ajar door, his hand instinctively on his tine, though he hadn't drawn it. "Mr. Whitmore, we're entering the room now." No answer. He pushed the open door with his foot, keeping his distance, flashlight illuminating the interior. What they saw made all 4 stop simultaneously. The room was impossible. Not in the sense of being supernatural or fantastical, but simply in terms of basic geometry. From the outside, the house was a standard 3-story Victorian house. Each floor should be approximately the same size. But this room extended far beyond what the external dimensions of the house would allow. Barrett later estimated that the room was at least 25 meters deep, when from the outside, the whole house was perhaps 12 meters from front to back. "How?" Chen began, but couldn't finish the question. In the center of the impossible room was Adrian Whitmore. He was sitting in a simple wooden chair, completely still, looking directly at them. But it wasn't his gaze that was most disturbing. It was the room behind him. The walls were covered, absolutely covered with photographs, thousands of them, all the size of standard photos, arranged in a precise grid covering every available inch of wall. Morrison took a cautious step into the room and immediately stumbled. Looking down, he saw that the floor was also covered, but not with photographs, with papers, documents, sheets and more sheets of handwritten text, some yellowed with age, others seemingly fresh, all covered in the same tight, meticulous calligraphy. Thousands of pages scattered across the floor like paper snow, layers of them, some reaching depths of several centimeters. "What is all this?" Willis whispered, his voice echoing strangely in the vast space. Whitmore finally spoke, his voice now calm, resigned. "Records. Every iteration, every cycle, every time someone enters this house, what they see, what they experience, what they become. I have documented for—" He paused, consulting his watch, which seemed comically normal in the midst of the madness. 17 years, 4 months, and 11 days. Or has it only been 1 day? Time doesn't work properly here. You'll find that out soon. Barrett forced himself to focus. "Mr. Whitmore, we need you to leave this room and come downstairs with us. There are concerns about your mental well-being and—" Whitmore interrupted him with an abrupt laugh. "My mental well-being, officer? Look at the photographs. Really look at them, and then tell me about mental well-being."
Chen was closer to the wall, and with professional reflexes, she shone a flashlight on some of the closest photos. At first glance, they looked like ordinary family photos. People in various settings, smiling, posing, casual moments captured. But then she noticed all the photographs showed the same people. Not the same family crossed the years, but literally the same people. Same clothes, same poses, same backgrounds, repeated endlessly. These are, she began, moving the flashlight to adjacent photos. Same people, same photo. Then she realized they weren't entirely the same. There were slight variations. In one, a man was smiling. In the adjacent one, he wasn't. Same pose, same angle, but different expression. Morrison joined Chen, studying the walls. "They're like film frames," he murmured, as if someone had taken thousands of photos of the same scene, each capturing a slightly different moment. "But why?" Whitmore replied, "Because that's what this room does. That's what this house does. It captures moments. It fragments time."
Chen instinctively recoiled, his training useless against what he was witnessing. This isn't possible. We just walked in. There wasn't time to take photos, much less develop and put them on the wall. His voice rose in tone, a hint of panic creeping in. Whitmore simply shook his head. Time. You keep thinking about time linearly. Past, present, future, cause, effect. But in this room, time is fluid. The photos weren't taken after you walked in. They were taken before, during, after, and never, all simultaneously. This room exists in every moment at once, and now you do too. Morrison forced himself to look more closely at the photographs. In one variation, he could clearly see himself having a panic attack, kneeling, hyperventilating. In another, he was calm, studying the walls methodically. These are future possibilities? Alternate timelines? Not future, Whitmore corrected. Simultaneous, all happening now. You're only aware of this specific version because it's the one your consciousness has chosen to inhabit, but the other versions of you are equally real, experiencing their own versions of this moment. He slowly rose from his chair. "Let me demonstrate. Officer Barrett, get your weapon." Barrett instinctively recoiled. I'm not asking you to shoot me," Whitmore interrupted him. "Just get it. Hold it. See what happens." Hesitantly, Barrett drew his baton. In 1999, standard Met officers didn't carry firearms, so his baton was his primary weapon. The moment his fingers closed around it, the photographs on the wall changed, all of them simultaneously, updated to show Barrett holding the baton, but still in 1,000 variations, pointing differently, different expressions, different positions. Willis, his voice trembling, asked the question everyone was thinking. "What happens if we leave? If we simply leave this room and this house now?" Whitmore smiled sadly. "You can try, but you'll find that the decision to leave also creates photographs. Photographs of you leaving, photographs of you staying, photographs of you making thousands of other choices. And with each choice, more photos appear. The house is documenting every possibility. And the longer you stay, the more deeply intertwined you become with the room. Eventually," he gestured to the documents on the floor, "eventually, you begin to exist primarily in photographs rather than in reality. You become more probability than certainty, more potential than actual." Chen knelt down, picking up one of the papers from the floor. It was a letter, dated 1985, addressed to "Whoever may find this." "My name is Robert Henderson. I lived in this house with my family for 3 years. In the 3rd year, we discovered the room. It wasn't here before, I'm sure, but one day it was. And my wife, curious, went in. The photos appeared, thousands of versions of her, and then she began to change. Every day she was slightly different, small things at first, different moods, slightly altered preferences, but then bigger changes, memories she shouldn't have, skills she never learned. It was as if all the versions of her from the photos were beginning to bleed together, merging. She was becoming all her possibilities simultaneously, and she was going crazy because of it." Morrison read over Chen's shoulder. "How did this end for the Hendersons?" Whitmore replied, "It didn't end. It just continued. They're still here, in a sense, trapped in the photographs, existing in all variations simultaneously. If you look closely, he pointed to a specific section of the wall, you can occasionally see them moving in the photos. Small movements, blinks, turns of the head, as if they were alive but trapped behind the glass, inside the photographic paper. Barrett forced himself to look where Whitmore was pointing. The photos of the Henderson family, hundreds of them. And yes, if he looked closely, very closely, he could swear he saw movement. An eye blinking in one photo, a mouth moving slightly in another, like video playing one frame at a time through 1,000 still images. My God, are they conscious? Trapped in this? I don't know, Whitmore admitted. I can't ask, but based on my own experience, yes, probably. Because you see, I've discovered something in the last 17 years. The more time I spend in this room, the more aware I become of other versions of myself. I can feel them, other iterations, other choices, other lives, all existing in parallel. And occasionally, I can even access their memories, see through their eyes. It's like being 1,000 people simultaneously, all slightly different, all equally real. He laughed humorlessly. Humans weren't developed for that kind of awareness. It shatters us. That's why the Hendersons eventually stopped resisting and allowed themselves to be completely absorbed. It's easier to let go, to dissolve into the possibilities, than to fight to maintain a singular identity. Willis stepped back toward the door. We need to get out, now, before it happens to us. But when she reached the doorframe, she stopped, because on the other side, in the hallway, there were also photographs, covering the walls, going up the stairs, probably going down as well. The whole house was covered, and each photo showed the 4 officers in 1,000 variations, 1,000 possibilities, and in each one they seemed progressively more different, not just in action, but in essence, as if each possibility was leading to different evolutions of who they were. It's spreading, Chen realized, his voice hollow. It's not just this room, it's the whole house, and it's spreading based on us. Our presence activated something. Whitmore nodded darkly. Yes, the house learns, adapts. When I moved in, it was just photos of the Hendersons. Then slowly photos of me started appearing. Now it's you. The house collects possibilities, accumulates them, and the more consciousness it feeds, the stronger it becomes. He looked directly at Barrett. That's why I warned you not to come in, because now you're part of it, and there's no way out that doesn't leave part of you behind. Barrett made a commanding decision. Everyone out, now. Ignore the photographs, ignore everything you're seeing. Simply move to the front door and get out of this house. His voice had trained authority, trying to impose order on impossible chaos. But as he spoke, he noticed something disturbing. His own voice was echoing slightly, as if multiple versions of him were speaking milliseconds out of sync. The others heard it too. Morrison was the first to move, turning toward the stairs. But when he took his first step, he stumbled violently, as if his feet weren't where his brain expected them to be. My coordination is off, he said, his voice tense. It's like my body is receiving conflicting instructions, multiple sets of commands simultaneously. Chen tried to help him steady himself, but when he touched his arm, they both gasped. It wasn't an electric shock, but something stranger. For a split second, they both saw through each other's eyes. Chen saw his own hand from Morrison's perspective. Morrison saw the bedroom ceiling from Chen's perspective. And then the sensation passed, leaving them both disoriented and nauseous. Don't touch each other, Whitmore warned. Physical contact intensifies the effect. The house is trying to intertwine you, to bleed together in the same way the photographs show versions of you bleeding together. Willis, still near the door, forced herself down the first step of the stairs, but what she saw made her freeze. Descending the stairs, simultaneously ascending, were versions of herself, at least 5 of them, superimposed like multiple exposures, all walking in different directions, all transparent like ghosts, but becoming more solid with each passing moment. Are you seeing this? Willis asked, her voice rising. The other versions of me? Barrett looked, and her stomach churned. He could see them now, too. Not just Willis, but all of them. The hallway was becoming crowded with ghostly versions of the four officers, all doing slightly different things, all existing in the same space simultaneously. In some versions, they were fleeing in panic. In others, they were calm, investigating methodically. In some, they were fighting amongst themselves. In others, simply standing still, staring into nothingness. The house is collapsing all possibilities into observable reality. You are becoming aware of your other versions. Soon, you won't be able to distinguish between which one is you and which one is them. Morrison, fighting off growing nausea, forced himself down the stairs, ignoring the ghostly versions of himself. He reached the ground floor, turned toward the hallway leading to the front door. The distance couldn't be more than 10 meters, but it seemed to stretch on endlessly, like a hallway in a nightmare. And worse, with every step he took, he could see a version of himself in the hallway, a version that had taken different steps, chosen a different path, and that version was looking back at him with an expression of growing horror, as if realizing they were the same person, but diverging with each decision. "I can't do this," Morrison whispered, stopping. "I don't know which direction is real. They all seem equally valid." Barrett followed him down the stairs, determined to get at least one of them out. But when he caught up with Morrison and tried to guide him, he saw something that almost broke his resolution. Through the window beside the front door, he could see the outside of the house, except it wasn't the outside they had left 15 minutes ago. It was multiple outsides, superimposed, day and night simultaneously, rain and dry, a street full of modern cars and an old one with horse-drawn carriages, all versions of the street, all temporal moments existing at once. "The reality outside is starting to destabilize as well," Whitmore said, having followed them downstairs. "It's not just inside the house. Your presence, your growing confusion is causing ripples. The more you struggle to distinguish between possibilities, the more—" Within 12 minutes, Sergeant Marcus Holland arrived with 2 more units, 4 additional officers. Holland was a 20-year veteran. He had seen practically everything London had to offer. But when he stopped outside number 47, something immediately felt wrong. The house seemed to vibrate? Not physically, but optically, as if its image were slightly out of focus, flickering in perception. "Barrett, status report," Holland said into his radio as he cautiously approached. Barrett's reply came fragmented, echoing strangely. "Sergeant, no. Between. 4 of us. Trapped. House is... temporality. Doesn't make sense." Static interrupted, then the voice returned. "Photographs. All versions. We can't get out. We tried. The door." Static again. Holland frowned. Radio interference wasn't uncommon, but this was different. It was as if the transmission was coming from multiple, slightly desynchronized sources. He instructed the other 4 officers to remain outside as he approached the front door, which was ajar, swaying slightly in a breeze that shouldn't exist. Through the opening he could see the hallway, and he stopped. The walls were completely covered with photographs. But these weren't ordinary photographs. He could see them moving subtly, as if they were videos playing one frame at a time, and they all showed the same 4 officers, his officers, in 1,000 variations. "Christ," he murmured. He reached for his radio again. "Control, this is Sergeant Holland. I'm going to need tactical support unit and, Jesus, I don't know, psychiatric crisis team? This isn't a standard situation." Before Control could respond, a voice came from inside the house, PC Barrett, but sounding distant, echoed. "Sergeant, don't go in, please. We're already 4 too many. Don't add any more." But protocol was clear. Officers in danger, supervisor had an obligation to assess. Holland stepped through the door. Immediately he felt as if he had passed through an invisible membrane, sudden pressure and simultaneous release, the temperature dropping 10 degrees instantly. And sounds. Multiple conversations, all in the voices of the 4 officers, coming from all directions simultaneously. He turned left toward the living room and saw Barrett, or a version of him, sitting in a chair, head in his hands, clearly in distress. But when Holland blinked, Barrett was standing, looking out the window. He blinked again. Barrett was kneeling, looking at something on the floor. "Barrett," Holland called, his voice uncertain.
All three versions of Barrett turned simultaneously. "Sergeant," they said in imperfect unison, their voices slightly out of sync, "you shouldn't have gone in." Holland instinctively recoiled, feeling panic begin to rise. He was an experienced officer, trained to remain calm under pressure, but this was beyond any training. He turned to leave, but the front door was now different. It was still there, still open, but it seemed to be in multiple states simultaneously. Open, closed, locked, broken, all possibilities existing at once. "What's happening here?" he demanded, turning to the versions of Barrett. One answered, "The house documents possibilities. It collapses timelines. It makes all versions real." Another added, "The more consciousnesses enter, the stronger it gets." The third completed, "And now you're part of it too, Sergeant Holland. We can already see your other versions starting to appear." Holland looked at the wall to his right. New photographs were appearing, Polaroids materializing out of nowhere and adhering to the wall. Each one showed him, in this hallway, but in different things. In one he was drawing his weapon, in another he was running, in another he was collapsed, and they kept appearing, proliferating, multiplying. Morrison appeared at the top of the stairs, or at least a version of him. "Sergeant, it's getting worse. Whitmore says the house is reaching some kind of critical mass. 5 consciousnesses is more than enough for something. He doesn't explain it clearly, or he can't. He's starting to fragment too." Holland forced himself to think rationally through the growing fear. "Evacuation. We all leave together. Now. Formation. Don't separate." He started climbing the stairs toward Morrison, but each step became more difficult. It was as if he were walking through temporal molasses, each movement creating resistance, each decision branching out into multiple possibilities that he could feel pulling him in different directions. When he reached the top, Morrison was different. Older or younger? His features seemed to be in flux. "How long have you been here?" Holland asked. Morrison answered, but the answer came from 3 slightly different mouths. 30 minutes, 3 hours, 2 days. I don't know anymore. Time isn't linear here." Chen appeared from one of the rooms, or multiple versions of her, superimposed like a flickering image. "Sergeant, Whitmore says that if we all try to leave at the exact same time, making exactly the same choices, we can create temporal singularity, a single point of certainty in a sea of possibilities. This should allow us to anchor ourselves in one reality and leave." Holland clung to this like a lifeline. "Right, yes. How do we do this?" One of the Chens replied, "We must decide at the exact moment to make the exact same movement. Step with the left foot, then the right. No deviation, no hesitation, no allowing doubt or alternatives to enter the mind. Pure and singular thought, pure and singular action." It sounded impossible. How could 5 people, all already fragmenting into multiple versions, achieve perfect synchronicity? But there was no apparent alternative. Holland called through the house, "Everyone in the ground floor hallway, now. Let's try coordinated evacuation." Slowly, painfully, the versions of the 5 officers began to converge in the hallway. Some versions disappeared, reabsorbed, while others solidified. Whitmore appeared from one of the rooms, or multiple versions of him, superimposed like a flickering image. "It won't work," he said softly. "I've tried this. Hundreds of times in hundreds of versions of myself. The house won't allow it. The moment they try to act in unison, it amplifies minute differences, a slightly different heartbeat, an intrusive thought in one mind but not another, a millisecond's hesitation, and those small differences become big. They become new branches, new universes of possibility." Willis, who was relatively stable compared to the others, asked the desperate question, "So there's no way out? Are we stuck here forever?" Whitmore met his eyes. "There is a way out, but it requires sacrifice. Someone has to completely surrender to the house, allow themselves to fragment completely into all possible versions of themselves, become part of the house's structure instead of its victim. When that happens, it releases enough temporal pressure for others to escape. Temporarily. That's how the Hendersons eventually allowed me to move in. They surrendered. They dissolved into the photographs, and the house was quiet long enough for new consciousness to enter without being immediately fragmented." Silence. Then Holland asked the question no one wanted to ask. "Are you volunteering?" Whitmore shook his head. "I'm already fragmented enough. It would take months for me to completely dissolve. But one of you, fresh, newly arrived, it would be a matter of minutes, maybe an hour at most, enough time for the other 4 to leave before the house reasserts complete control." The weight of Whitmore's suggestion hung in the air like a physical presence. 5 officers looked at each other, their multiple versions flickering in and out of existence, each contemplating a sacrifice that went beyond death. It was obliteration of singular identity, dissolution into 1,000 simultaneous possibilities. "No," Barrett said firmly, finding his commanding voice despite the fear. "We don't sacrifice team members. We find another way." But even as he was speaking, he could feel his certainty fragmenting. One version of him agreeing with Whitmore, another version already volunteering, another version attacking Whitmore for suggesting such a thing. All reactions existing simultaneously in his expanded consciousness. Morrison suddenly spoke, his voice quiet. "I'll do it." Everyone turned to him. "Dave, no," Chen began, but he cut her off. "Listen, I'm disintegrating faster than you are. I can feel it. Maybe because I went into the room first, I spent more time in direct exposure. I can barely distinguish which thought is my original one and which ones are from my other versions. In another hour, I'll be lost anyway. At least this way, my dissolution serves a purpose." Willis protested. "There are other options. We can call in more backup, specialists, someone who understands temporal physics, or—" "And how many more consciousnesses do we add to the problem?" Morrison interrupted. "Each new person who comes in adds more fuel. Whitmore is right. Someone has to accept this, and that someone should be me." He turned to Whitmore. "How does it work? What do I need to do?" Whitmore genuinely seemed sad. "You stop fighting. You stop trying to maintain your singular identity. You open your consciousness to all possible versions of yourself and allow them to flow together. It will be confusing at first, then painful, then— I don't know. The Hendersons never described the final stage, but based on how they continue to subtly move in the photographs, I think some form of consciousness persists, just not consciousness that we would recognize as human." Morrison nodded. "All right, I accept. But you 4, promise you'll leave as soon as the house opens. Don't hesitate, don't look back, don't try to save me, just run." Holland, as the superior officer, should have stopped this. He should have insisted on waiting for backup, on finding an alternative. But he could feel the house pulsing around them, growing stronger with each passing moment. And he could see that Morrison was right. He was disintegrating more visibly than the others, his edges—
In the following hours, 47 Fortismere Avenue was cordoned off. Tactical support unit arrived, followed by senior officers, followed eventually by people in civilian suits who vaguely identified themselves as ministry consultants. Holland and the other 3 were separated and interviewed individually, each trying to articulate the impossible to skeptical officers who clearly thought they were dealing with some kind of collective psychosis or gas poisoning. But there was a problem. PC David Morrison was undeniably missing, and his last known location was inside that house. Protocol demanded a full search. At 4:32 a.m., a team of 6 tactical officers, fully equipped with body cameras, special technology requested specifically for this operation, entered number 47. Holland, Chen, Barrett, and Willis watched from live feeds set up in a command van outside. For the first 5 minutes, nothing seemed abnormal, just an empty house. No photographs on the walls, no temporal anomalies, just empty, dusty rooms. "They disappeared," Chen whispered, looking at the feeds. "All the photographs. The house is normal." Barrett shook his head. "Or it's hiding, waiting, learning from us." On the feed, the tactical team reached the 2nd floor, approached the door of the room that had contained the horrors. The team leader cautiously opened it. Inside was just a standard empty room, perhaps 4 meters by 4, normal dimensions, no photographs, no documents on the floor, no furniture. "Control, room is clear, no signs of the missing officer," came the voice through the radio. Willis pressed closer to the screen. "Search behind where the photographs were, inside the walls, He's there. I know he is. But a thorough search yielded nothing. No body, no evidence of Morrison ever having been there, no evidence that anything abnormal had occurred. The tactical team left after 40 minutes, all reporting no adverse effects, no unusual experiences. The house was empty and inert. In the following days, the 4 surviving officers underwent extensive medical and psychological evaluations. No evidence of gas poisoning was found. No hallucinogenic substances were found in their systems. Neurologically, they were healthy. But psychologically, police psychiatrists noted disturbing patterns. All 4 described identical experiences in detail, impossible to coordinate if it were shared hallucination. All showed signs of genuine trauma, and more peculiarly, all reported occasionally seeing alternate versions of themselves since that night, shadows in the corner of their vision, reflections in mirrors showing them doing things they weren't doing, vivid dreams of lives they hadn't lived but seemed as real as their actual memories. Dr. Elizabeth Harrow, the senior psychiatrist assigned to the case, wrote in her report, "While I cannot verify the events they claim to have witnessed, I can confirm that these 4 individuals genuinely believe they experienced something profoundly abnormal. More concerning, they exhibit symptoms consistent with something I can only describe as temporal identity dissociation, a sense that multiple versions of themselves exist simultaneously. This does not correspond to any known psychological disorder. I recommend medical discharge for all 4 and continued monitoring." A week after the incident, all 4 officers resigned from the Met Police, Barrett first, then Chen, then Willis, and finally Holland. None gave reasons beyond vague references to personal issues and the need for a career change. But the truth was both simpler and more complex. None of them could do the job anymore. How do you routinely drive when you can see ghostly versions of yourself where the car crashed at every possible intersection? How do you arrest someone when you can see 1,000 versions of them, some innocent, some guilty, all equally real? How do you live in a world that insists on being singular when you've seen proof that reality is far more fluid? P.C. David Morrison was officially listed as a missing person presumed dead. Formal investigation concluded no evidence of a crime, no suspects. Case remains open but inactive. His family, wife and 2 young children, were left without closure, without a body to bury, without answers. Holland tried to visit them once, tried to explain, but how do you tell a widow that her husband was absorbed by a house that fragments reality? He left after 10 minutes, unable to complete the thought, leaving them even more confused and hurt. As for the house at number 47, it was formally seized under various obscure public safety regulations and remains empty to this day. Officially, it has serious structural problems that make it uninhabitable. Unofficially, it is on a special classification list maintained by...
In the following hours, 47 Fortismere Avenue was cordoned off. Tactical support unit arrived, followed by senior officers, followed eventually by people in civilian suits who vaguely identified themselves as ministry consultants. Holland and the other 3 were separated and interviewed individually, each trying to articulate the impossible to skeptical officers who clearly thought they were dealing with some kind of collective psychosis or gas poisoning. But there was a problem. P.C. David Morrison was undeniably missing, and his last known location was inside that house. Protocol demanded a full search. At 4:32 a.m., a team of 6 tactical officers, fully equipped with body cameras, special technology requested specifically for this operation, entered number 47. Holland, Chen, Barrett, and Willis watched from live feeds set up in a command van outside. For the first 5 minutes, nothing seemed abnormal, just an empty house. No photographs on the walls, no temporal anomalies, just empty, dusty rooms. "They disappeared," Chen whispered, looking at the feeds. "All the photographs. The house is normal." Barrett shook his head. "Or it's hiding, waiting, learning from us." On the feed, the tactical team reached the 2nd floor, approached the door of the room that had contained the horrors. The team leader cautiously opened it. Inside was just a standard empty room, perhaps 4 meters by 4.
Normal dimensions. No photographs, no documents on the floor, no furniture. "Control, room is clear. No signs of the missing officer," came the voice through the radio. Willis pressed closer to the screen. "Search behind where the photographs were, inside the walls. He's there. I know he is." But a thorough search yielded nothing. No body, no evidence of Morrison ever having been there, no evidence that anything abnormal had occurred. The tactical team left after 40 minutes, all reporting no adverse effects, no unusual experiences. The house was empty and inert. In the following days, the 4 surviving officers underwent extensive medical and psychological evaluations. No evidence of gas poisoning was found. No hallucinogenic substances were found in their systems. Neurologically, they were healthy. But psychologically, police psychiatrists noted disturbing patterns. All 4 described identical experiences in detail, impossible to coordinate if it were shared hallucination. All showed signs of genuine trauma. And more peculiarly, all reported occasionally seeing alternate versions of themselves since that night, shadows in the corner of their vision, reflections in mirrors showing them doing things they weren't doing, vivid dreams of lives they hadn't lived but seemed as real as their actual memories. Dr. Elizabeth Harrow, the senior psychiatrist assigned to the case, wrote in her report, "While I cannot verify the events they claim to have witnessed, I can confirm that these 4 individuals genuinely believe they experienced something profoundly abnormal. More concerning, they exhibit symptoms consistent with something I can only describe as temporal identity dissociation, a sense that multiple versions of themselves exist simultaneously. This does not correspond to any known psychological disorder. I recommend medical discharge for all 4 and continued monitoring." A week after the incident, all 4 officers resigned from the Met Police, Barrett first, then Chen, then Willis, and finally Holland. None gave reasons beyond vague references to personal issues and the need for a career change. But the truth was both simpler and more complex. None of them could do the job anymore. How do you routinely drive when you can see ghostly versions of yourself where the car crashed at every possible intersection? How do you arrest someone when you can see 1,000 versions of them, some innocent, some guilty, all equally real? How do you live in a world that insists on being singular when you've seen proof that reality is far more fluid? P.C. David Morrison was officially listed as a missing person presumed dead. Formal investigation concluded no evidence of a crime, no suspects. Case remains open but inactive. His family, wife and 2 young children, were left without closure, without a body to bury, without answers. Holland tried to visit them once, tried to explain, but how do you tell a widow that her husband was absorbed by a house that fragments reality? He left after 10 minutes, unable to complete the thought, leaving them even more confused and hurt. As for the house at number 47, it was formally seized under various obscure public safety regulations and remains empty to this day. Officially, it has serious structural problems that make it uninhabitable. Unofficially, it is on a special classification list maintained by a small department of the Home Office that does not publicly acknowledge its own existence. The list contains approximately 23 locations across the UK that exhibit anomalous properties not explained by conventional science. Number 47 Fortesmere Avenue is listed as Class 3, sufficient passive containment, or do not enter under any circumstance.
If you ever enter a house, any place, and feel that something is fundamentally wrong in a way that you can't articulate, trust that instinct. If the space seems slightly larger than it should from the outside, if your own voice echoes strangely, if you see reflections that don't quite match reality, if you feel, even for a moment, as if multiple versions of yourself are beginning to separate, different possibilities becoming tangible, leave immediately. Don't investigate. Don't be curious. Don't try to document or understand. Just leave and don't come back. Because once you see the seams, once you realize that reality isn't as solid as you think, you can't unsee. And that awareness can be damnation. Barrett,
in his last recorded statement before finally refusing to discuss the case further, said something that resonates. People think reality is solid rock that we're all standing on, but it's not. It's more like water, and most of us float on the surface, never questioning what's below. But if you dive too deep, if you see that there is no bottom, that it's just infinite possibility collapsing into temporary moments of certainty, well, after that, you can never float comfortably again. You always know you're one thought away from sinking. He paused, then added, Dave Morrison sank. He sank to the depths where all possibilities exist simultaneously. And I think part of him, perhaps the important part, is at peace with that. But me? I spend every day struggling to stay afloat, to believe that this moment, this version of me is the real one. Some days, it's easier than others, but it's never easy. The house is still there. 47 Fortesmere Avenue, Holloway, North London. You can drive by it today if you want. It looks perfectly normal from the street, just another Victorian house in a row of identical houses. But if you stop, if you look directly at it for too long, you'll start to notice the way it seems to subtly vibrate. The reflections in the windows don't quite match what they should be reflecting. The way, if you look very carefully, you can see shadows moving inside, 5 of them, always 5, living lives that never end because they exist in all variations simultaneously. And if you're particularly sensitive, particularly attuned to the seams of reality, you might even see your own possibilities begin to manifest. Versions of you that turned out differently, that made different choices, that lived different lives, all there just beneath the surface of singular certainty, waiting, always waiting. Because that's the ultimate truth about places like 47 Fortesmere Avenue. They don't create the possibilities. They only make visible what has always been there. And once you see it, you can never completely unsee it again. Sleep well. What if you wake up in the middle of the night and see a version of yourself standing in the mirror, doing something you're not doing? Don't panic. Just close your eyes. Count to 10. And when you open them again, it'll probably be gone. Probably. But if it hasn't, well, then maybe you should consider the possibility that you are the possibility, and the version in the mirror is the real one. There's no way to know for sure, not really. And that's the most terrifying truth of all.